Congratulations, boys. You made it through another Taco Tuesday. Back in the bucket till next week.
Weren't those vegetables so bad?
Nope, they're genetically modified to stay fresh. Just don't ask how old the Jell-O is.
Ew. Overreactor.org warns that over half of the vegetables sold in this country are genetically modified organisms whose effect on humans is unknown.
We know that soon after genetically modified soy was introduced into the UK, soy allergies skyrocketed there by 50%. Now, we can't say that it was definitely the genetic modification of the soy, but we do know that soy has an increase in trypsin inhibitor, the most commonly known soy allergen. But we also know that you can transfer allergens into genetically modified foods. In fact, the process of genetically engineering soy disrupted the DNA and caused a damaged section, which could, in theory, create an allergenic protein. Also, the gene which they inserted into the soy rearranged over time without explanation. So it's creating actually a slightly different protein, one that was never tested or predicted or intended to be produced inside the soy, and that might be allergenic or toxic. So there's a lot of reasons why a genetic modified food could create an increase in allergies. The UK, they took a genetically modified potato and they fed it to rats. And the rats ended up with potentially precancerous cell growth in their digestive tract, smaller brains, livers, and testicles due to retarded development of the organs, partial atrophy of the liver, and a damaged immune system. And it remains the most in-depth animal feeding study ever published on the safety of genetically engineered foods. And it shows that these foods might inherently be unsafe. Dr. Arpad Pusztai, before the study was completed, was invited to speak on television. And he expressed his concerns about genetically engineered foods and how the public is being used as guinea pigs in an uncontrolled experiment. When news of his research came out, he was a hero for 2 days at his prestigious institute. But then on a Tuesday evening, 2 phone calls were allegedly placed from the Prime Minister's office, forwarded through the receptionist to the institute's director. The next morning, Wednesday morning, Arpad Pusztai was fired after 35 years and silenced with threats of a lawsuit.
Personally, I've been contacted by telephone and email by a number of scientists who have serious concerns about aspects of the research that is taking place in various institutions in New Zealand and the increasingly close ties that are developing between science and commerce, but who are convinced that if they express these fears publicly, or even if they ask the awkward and difficult questions, they will be eased out of their institution.
Because of my involvement in the genetic engineering debate, I became very unpopular with the genetic engineers in my department. So I was, let's put it mildly, very strongly encouraged to retire early. Okay, I mean, I was basically hounded out of the department and the university that I had taught in for nearly 25 years.
And a UC Berkeley professor claims that he was being threatened by a senior Mexican government official who tried to get him not to publish incriminating evidence.
He pressured me in a pretty nasty way, threatened and did everything he could to try and convince me that I shouldn't publish.
The vast majority of the academic plant science is funded directly or indirectly from industry. And so that is one of the reasons that, at least I believe, that the academic plant biologists are somewhat hesitant about speaking, taking issue with some of the plant biotechnology, food issues.
This fear among scientists and the control by the biotech industry has meant that there has not been a lot of follow-up to evidence suggesting that genetically modified foods are unsafe, even inside governments. For example, in the Food and Drug Administration, they were approving the very first genetically modified drug. It was a drug injected into cows to increase milk supply. It's called recombinant bovine growth hormone, or RBGH. Scientists complain that this might be unhealthy for humans eating the dairy products and drinking the milk. But those who complained were fired, stripped of responsibilities, or forced out. The remaining whistleblowers had to write an anonymous letter to Congress claiming that there was fraud and conflict of interest in the department. Scientists have been concerned that genes might jump from the genetically modified food to gut bacteria. The biotech industry had claimed that the genes were destroyed during digestion and that no transfer was possible. The only human feeding study, however, contradicted that. It showed that genes that had been inserted into soy actually jumped from the soy and now took up residence inside the DNA of the gut bacteria inside the human beings. So even if we stop eating genetically modified soy, it's possible that the protein that it's engineered to create will continue to be produced inside of us. Organizations like the American Medical Association, the World Health Organization, and others were concerned that the antibiotic-resistant marker genes, which are inserted into genetically modified foods, might jump to our gut bacteria, and that could create new diseases that would be resistant to antibiotics. Also, when you genetically modify something, you have to put in a promoter, something to turn on that foreign gene so it operates 24/7 around the clock. But it turns out that this promoter can turn on other genes at random up and down the DNA. So inside the corn or soy, it might turn on other genes which could be allergenic or toxic or carcinogenic or anti-nutritional. But we now know that that promoter also transfers to gut bacteria. In addition, preliminary evidence showed that the promoter transferred to the organs, the internal organs of rats, after a single meal. Now, earlier we talked about corn that was genetically engineered to produce its own pesticide. Imagine the gene that produces the pesticide transferring to gut bacteria. Now you have a gene inside the DNA, inside our intestines, producing pesticide. It converts our bacteria into living pesticide factories. Tragically, children are most at risk from the potential dangers of genetically engineered foods. They have young, developing bodies, so they're going to be more at risk from possible toxins or nutritional problems. Children are more susceptible to allergies, 3 to 4 times more susceptible than adults, especially children below 2 years old. Also, children drink a lot of milk. Now, the cows injected with genetically engineered bovine growth hormone produce milk with an increased level of a hormone called IGF-1, insulin-like growth factor 1. Those with high levels of IGF-1 in their systems are much more likely to develop breast cancer and prostate cancer. Also, a lot of children have to take antibiotics because of ear infections and other problems. If there are antibiotic-resistant super diseases, that's going to have a tremendous impact on children.
American companies who release these genetically modified foodstuffs have never done proper risk assessment on them. Monsanto said that their genetically modified soya is safe. Then the FDA regarded that as evidence for its safety.
What concerns me is that the health risks of genetically modified organisms in agriculture are only assessed through relatively rudimentary biochemical analysis and short-term feeding trials of animals. And these are totally inadequate.
They feed these animals for only about 4 weeks. Sometimes, in one occasion, I think it was 6 weeks. You can't do cancer experiments in that time. And certainly they were not fed to animals and pregnant animals to see what happened to the offspring. And certainly biochemistry, immunology, tissue pathology, gut function, liver function and kidney function do not seem to be done.
Personally, I have a hard time trusting the 5 or 6 companies in the biotechnology industry which now control our seed supply. I have a hard time trusting them because they are essentially the same companies that brought us pesticides, that told us that pesticides were harmless, that pretended to show spokespeople eating them on television by the spoonful. Of course, it turned out later what they were eating was powdered milk because they weren't stupid enough to actually eat DDT. But these are companies with decades and decades of well-documented lying to the American public.
Many scientists say that industry research is rigged to avoid finding problems.
We need to have good independent safety testing of genetically engineered foods. In other words, safety testing that is not done by the applicant company.
I would recommend that perhaps we could set up human clinical trials using volunteers or genetically engineered scientists and their families, because I think they are so convinced of the safety of the products that they are creating.